Hello, everyone. How are you doing today?
Great.
Good to see you all. We may just get some other people joining us today, but for the sake of time, let's start this conversation. This is our Elon AI Research Network series. We have been organizing this research network series almost a year and a half. And typically, we hold this series in person, but we receive a lot of demands. They just want to do some webinar styles online so that people can just join and have some flexibility. So we are having our first webinar in terms of Elon AI Research Network series. The purpose of Elon AI Research Network series is a handful of mouthful of title show that what kind of evidence-based research has been done, and what are some interesting questions our faculty members exploring. And importantly, one of the secondary purpose of it, connect those people across campus, pursue some larger grant opportunities. In that regard, Matt was one of our participant in last summer and last submission of AI grant. And we have worked with Eric Hall and Sagun, other people to pursue those grants and other research opportunities. And I don't want to mumble around, but I just very excited to welcome Dr. Matt Wittstein. I've known him for a while. And just a side note, my son and his daughter went to same daycare, and they are kind of buddy. They just my son always said, Parker, Parker. And so Associate Professor of Exercise Science and Director of Neuroscience at Elon University. His teaching and research focus on neuroscience and human movement with an emphasis on how people learn and adapt across different contexts. This perspective also shaped how I approach to integrating tools like AI in the curriculum. In today's talk, Dr. Wittstein will share a continuum-based approach to using AI across courses, from introductory neuroscience to senior seminars, and he will reflect on how his approach has evolved and offer practical example and framework for using AI in ways that align with the course level, clarifying expectations, and create a more space for meaningful students' feedback. Indeed, that is the whole purpose of big talk around generative AI, and we are going to learn from Matt how he's enabling these tools to shine in his work. Thank you so much, Matt, and it's on you right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me, Mustafa, and thank you for the really kind introduction. I also want to acknowledge that Meraki's son also is in our daycare class. So we have a good daycare crew, and I believe Lana's twins are also in that class, I believe. So awesome daycare. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm going to get my screen sharing going. So I believe you should be able to see my screen now. And after providing some thoughts of what I was going to talk about and then continued to work on developing the actual talk, I realized I shifted gears a bit. And this is really going to be more of a pedagogy talk with AI a little bit in the background. I sort of realized as I finished developing the talk that I didn't have a lot of AI directly in it. But I think that's okay, and I think you'll enjoy what I have to share today. And so I want to start with this sort of analogy, this idea of swimming, floating, or drowning. And for some context, I was a high school and college swimmer. I was a swim coach for many years. So this analogy sort of resonates really well with me. During my graduate program, I taught swimming as part of my assistantship. And I really distinctly remember teaching our fitness swim class, which you would imagine being swimming lots of laps really fast to get in better shape. But having students enrolled that literally could not swim. And my number one goal for them was that they don't drown, that they are able to go to the pool with their kids someday and be safe. And it sort of gave me this idea of the landscape we're in with artificial intelligence feels a little bit like that. And so we know that AI has changed our teaching and our approach to teaching very rapidly. But we also know that educators' reactions and opinions vary widely. That some folks are early adopters and super into every aspect that they can figure out. Hello, Mustafa Akben. Other folks are a little bit more resistant, uncertain, a little concerned. And we have everything across those spectrums. And so when I think of this idea of swimming, floating, or drowning, I suspect most of us have actually experienced all three states of this. And so we'll get into what that means in just a second. But I want to kind of start with a quick review of, how the last 8-ish years have gone in terms of AI development. And so this isn't a holistic review. It is a headlines from Inside Higher Ed and from the Chronicle of Higher Ed to just give a sense of like, what have we been talking about since AI sort of hit us in the face. And so we have several headlines. Artificial intelligence and retention. This is from November 13th, 2018. And it was actually an article about deep learning, which is a precursor to our generative AI, but ways of understanding our admissions information, our student performance information, to figure out who needs help with supports so they stay at your school. And this is from 2018. This is a few years before OpenAI sort of cracked the door, the open Pandora's box, if you will, on generative AI in education. And so I just like to bring this particular article up because it does predate that. It reminds us that AI is not actually this brand new thing, that it's been around, it's been developed, but the way we've used it has shifted drastically, and it's continuing to shift. And then we get sort of into the more modern times. So for all intents and purposes, public ChatGPT became available in about November of 2022, I believe. And then we started seeing it pretty regularly in our classrooms shortly thereafter, we'll just say. And so immediately in January of 23 in Inside Higher Ed, we see this article, ChatGPT Threat or Menace. January 22nd, worried about ChatGPT, don't be. March 5th, 2026, this is just a couple of weeks ago, in-person classes aren't safe from the AI cheating boom. March 6th, a comprehensive view of the role of AI in the university. March 10th, AI is not replacing learning, it's exposing where learning was thin to begin with. And now we're switching over to the Chronicle, March 12th, so literally just on Sunday, I believe. Is AI making us stupid? Cal Newport is worried. The Georgetown computer scientist on resisting the temptation to automate hard thought. And then finally, I've got a couple more. Presidents pressured in Trump's second term. One section of this focused on AI. And I captured the quote here that while 53% are optimistic about the growing impact of AI on higher education, another 36% are concerned. It's showing us that our college leaders are not 100% or even 80% anywhere. And then my favorite part is at the bottom is, however, when asked about their own institution, only 29% said they're unprepared. So it's sort of this acknowledgement that we don't quite all have it right yet. But we have it right, just everyone else doesn't quite have it right yet. And then finally, this one this was from Monday, I believe. Blackboard executives say catching AI cheating is a lost cause. This Blackboard executive isn't worried. And so the thesis of this article was essentially saying that these new agentic artificial intelligences are going to be even harder for us to catch in cheating. They're going to be able to log into their learning management system and just do the dang thing for them. You may have read stories about Einstein AI, which I think has been taken down at this point. But they were basically marketing it as it'll do college for you while you just go have fun. Which is not, in my opinion, the purpose of higher education. And so I wanted to rehash just all of those headlines because I think they set a really clear frame of, one, it's changed very rapidly, and I did jump from 2023 to 2026 to emphasize that. But that's only 3 years that we've seen some massive changes. The challenges that we're writing about and that we're learning about are shifting. And especially early on, but even now, there's not consensus. All right, so we're not all going to agree on the best approaches, and I hope that I can present a framework and an idea that helps you think about how you want to use AI or how you don't want to use AI in your teaching. And so on to the analogy. So going from left to right, we've got sort of this idea of drowning and then floating and then swimming. And so I view the drowning as that sense of feeling overwhelmed, defensive or resistant, feeling like the AI police. I've yet to find one faculty member that is excited to be the AI police. No one wants that job. We didn't get into this field for that work. And it might also include feeling like all of your students are just turning in AI slop, if you will. In the middle, we have our sort of floating, which I sort of see as the folks that are experimenting cautiously, but aren't really certain about how to fully integrate it into their teaching and learning workflow, into some of their service work, but they're at least familiar with what it is. And they're starting to identify things that could be better with the use of AI, and things that they do really well without the use of AI. And then finally, we get to our swimming, which is that intentional pedagogical design, using AI creatively and critically, adapting as the technology shifts, and students and the student use cases, how students are actually using the technology shifts. So we're changing what we do as we continue to learn more. I would contend that very few people are truly swimmers when it comes to AI, that most of us are somewhere in that between floating and between swimming stages. And I want to also point out that these are not identities. It's not that we are a drowner or a floater or a swimmer, but they're more states that we exist in at a particular time. And we can change states, though we might gravitate towards one or between two of these. So generally, if you are an early adopter, you're probably kind of in between floating and swimming. If you are very, very resistant, you're probably feeling somewhere between drowning and floating. And I speak in generalities because everyone's feelings are going to be slightly different. And so what I want to bring next is just this literal from the YMCA. I can't remember which YMCA website it came from, but literally how we teach people how to swim. And we think in those early stages, parent and child type of things, it's literally just knowing that water exists and that it's not going to kill you. That's stage one, that it's a place that you can actually live and be happy, and like things can happen, learn how your body moves through the water. And then we get to the skills that are actually leading towards swimming. And so we get sort of this acclimation period where we are getting more comfortable with how our body's able to move through the water, but then we start developing an ability to move intentionally through the water. And as we become more proficient swimmers, we get specialized. We learn specific strokes. We learn the specific really detailed things that you want to be doing within each of those strokes. And we become really excellent swimmers. And so as a former swim coach, swimmer, I really like this analogy because it's a nice motor developmental analogy, which is something that I study a bit. But it also just feels kind of relevant and timely to me. And so what I want to ask to start is, why are we all in different places? And this is a webinar, so it's no call and response. But I want to just sort of acknowledge that we've got our sort of drowning person over here. We've got our super chill floaty person here. We've got our awesome swimmer here. And if we look at where professors are located, Sigmund Freud on the bottom left here, we will be on all sorts of different spots along this spectrum. And so I want you to think where you might be in this spot. And then I want us to consider a little bit together of why are we in different spots? And there's some easy answers here. One, we've all had different experiences. Two, we're all in different disciplines. Well, maybe not all of us in completely unique disciplines, but we come from different backgrounds, different disciplines, some that reward AI use, some that fear AI use, some that are in between. We all individually probably have different values. I know one of my values is related to creativity, and so AI can actually stunt creativity in some ways, but it can also advance creativity in other ways. So how I use AI can be affected by my values related to creativity and novelty. And we also have different identities. And so I also want to take a moment to just acknowledge some of my identities. I am an associate professor, which means I have been here for long enough to earn tenure. I am a white male, and I come from a position where I generally get good spots because I tick a lot of the identity default boxes. And so that gives me some space to be able to play with my teaching and try some things out that may not be accessible to absolutely everyone. And so I just want to acknowledge that all of those pieces really start to build this picture of why are we located where we are on this sort of spectrum. And so as you saw those headlines and reflected on your own position on this little map, this little swimming pool of, we'll call it fun, I want to introduce you to a framework that I've been thinking about that kind of helps us think about where good pedagogy lives. And I don't know if good is the right word, but it's maybe just be where your pedagogy lives, where individualized pedagogy lives. And so I'm going to start with this box. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, you said you'd find out what a Rubik's Cube has to do with swimming today. And this is it. So typically when we think about where pedagogy lives, we're usually thinking about things that are along the student development axis and the faculty development axis. And so what those represent are the knowledge and skill and the motivation and those sort of characteristics that faculty have, as well as the skill and knowledge and motivation and interests that students have. And where they intersect is usually where your teaching should kind of occur. What I'm going to propose and suggest today is that our affect related to new technologies, and I use the word technology broadly, is also going to shift our pedagogical decisions, okay? And so we'll come back to this. I don't want to get too hung up on this because I haven't really made a great picture, but I just want to be thinking about this as this sort of three-dimensional space where your teaching lives. And one of those axes is literally just how you feel about your teaching experiences, your teaching practices. And so keep moving forward. So to get there, we have to actually start with some basics of student development theory, a little bit of faculty development, and a little bit of affect. And so I'm going to present three different sort of I can't think of the right word right now, but leaders of student development theory. For some context, another shared experience Mustafa and I have are we both have been live-in faculty members. And so I learned a lot of this student development through working with ResLife and understanding what those student development models are. And so this is my personal favorite to point to. I really like the concept of it. But Marcia Baxter Magolda in approximately the early 2000s really started to accelerate this idea of self-authorship. And essentially what it's saying is that through the stages of development, through cognitive development, through intrapersonal development, so knowing who you are and creating a definition of yourself, and through interpersonal development, understanding your relationship to others and social structures, we naturally sort of shift from this external pressures, external formula, reacting to the authoritative powers around us, playing our traditional roles in society, to having sort of existential crises that challenge these standards, to finally getting to this sort of altruistic goal of self-authoring, that you are actually the author of your own story and you are allowed to have values and beliefs and identities that are different than what the world expects of you. And when we think about student development in a higher education setting, we are very often in the classroom very focused on cognitive development and less acknowledging of how we are intentionally interacting with their intrapersonal or their interpersonal development. It doesn't mean we're not doing it. It just means that typically our learning outcomes are related to competency, knowledge, and skills. Okay. The second theory I want to bring up is Perry's theory of intellectual and ethical development. William Perry, this was probably the early 60s, essentially set out 4 stages of cognitive development. And those go from dualism up through commitment. And so dualism is essentially the idea that there is a right and a wrong. I know I have had several students that always want to know what the right answer is. And it takes a long time to get them to acknowledge that sometimes there's several right answers and you have to pick the most right answer. And so he had this idea of dualism sort of moving towards multiplicity and relativism. So that idea that knowledge could be uncertain, that it's context-based, that it's relative to other types of knowledge. And then finally, that last stage is this idea of commitment, of accepting your way of knowing, accepting that there are limitations and strengths to your way of knowing, and that actually helps you understand other people's way of knowing as well. And so I really like this model specifically for these relativism, because I find myself often the multiplicity and relativism. I find myself often, especially with those sort of like sophomore level courses, trying to help students shift from what is the right answer to what is the best way to approach the problem and think about the answer that you got, if that makes sense to everybody. And so the last student development theory I want to bring up, this is also one of my favorite ones, is Chickering's 7 vectors of identity development. And what I want to highlight, these actually go in order from left to right: developing competence, managing emotions, autonomy to interdependence, developing mature relationships, developing integrity, developing purpose, and eventually establishing identity. And what I love about this one is that until you have sort of developed some competence, some basic knowledge and skills, you really can't do a whole lot to understand what are the ethics of working with those knowledge and skills. What are the purpose? What is your purpose in using those knowledge and skills? And ultimately, it's going to be difficult to fully understand your identity with those knowledge and skills within a discipline. And so I like this trajectory because it's simple in the sense that it's fairly linear, at the cost of that might be not perfectly accurate, but these are just models. They don't have to be perfectly accurate. So if you're thinking about becoming a blank, whatever field you're in, whatever profession you're in, or even just a dream you have, thinking about becoming a paddleboarder with my daughter every single summer, right? I need basic competence. I need to learn how to paddleboard before I can develop that autonomy to actually do it on my own. And then to understand how that is actually having a positive influence on her life, right? And so I really like this model, especially because it reminds us that we can't just have everything all at once, which I think a lot of our students want. They want the final answer all at once. And so the next theory we're going to bring in, this is a little bit more on the faculty development side. So this is from Everett Rogers, Diffusion of Innovations. I want to say this was published originally in the 70s, but is still prominent. And you've probably seen it as sort of the hype cycle of new technologies. But essentially what this is it states very clearly, and the words at the bottom say it perfectly, that diffusion is the process by which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among the members of a social system. And so in other words, innovation is communicated. We are telling people about innovation, okay? Now, we're not just telling all people. It's not just out there. We are telling people by word of mouth through certain channels. We're telling them over time. And as that message goes to different places over time. It builds in capacity, it snowballs, it becomes a bigger, more people are familiar with it, and that it is shared over time with, very importantly, people. People are the ones that are actually determining to adopt or not adopt new technologies. And so what we can see in the graph here is going in the vertical axis, you can see the percent of adoption. So the number of, more or less, the number of people that have adopted a particular innovation, and then the amount of time that that lasts. And so the longer you go, eventually more people will have adopted a technology. And this is coming from the perspective that once you adopt something, you can't unadopt it, if that makes sense. Like, you did adopt it once, even if you moved on to something else, we're not going to take points off or anything. And what you can see in these three particular innovations is that they could have a very steep takeoff where they get adopted very quickly, or they can have a much more gradual takeoff. And then we also have sort of these early adopters that often get some advantages at the cost of higher risks of adopting a new technology earlier. Those risks being wasting your time if the technology doesn't play out. And then as well as the later adopters that are maybe experiencing some disadvantages because they're starting from a little bit of behind once they actually get into a technology. One of my favorite examples of this is video games. So if you've ever played video games, I grew up with a Nintendo Entertainment System from 1989-ish, 87-ish, somewhere in there. I can't remember what birthday I got it for, but I was so excited. And I was really good at my Nintendo. But I didn't get another gaming system until I bought myself an Xbox 360 in like the 2000s. And so guess what I was not very good at? Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64. I didn't know how to use those technologies the same way because I didn't get that early adoption advantage. Okay. And so what Everett Rogers sort of claims or suggests is that the way people make the decisions about adopting technology go through this cycle of knowledge, persuasion, decision, implementation, and confirmation. And where I really see is that knowledge, we kind of all become aware of these things just through word of mouth in our everyday thing. Persuasion are probably things that we hear from others and shared experiences through talking about it. But where our real emphasis happens is where we start to make decisions, of where we start to engage in activities where we actually play with the innovation, where we're getting information of did it work or did it not work, to make those decisions of, do I want to implement this permanently, or do I want to just, it's something I dabbled with, okay? And so as we're thinking about this diffusion of innovations concept, I want to give you just a minute to think about some of these innovations in teaching over the last, I guess I'm at 600 years-ish. But just think about like how many teachers were probably really pissed off that the printing press came out. That, you know, wait, they can print this and they don't even need me to speak in front of the class anymore? They can just read everything I think in a book? Nothing made teachers more obsolete than books you can read. Except for, I guess, since our students don't always read, we still have some value in this world. But also innovations like grades started in the 1700s, late 1700s, presumably at Yale. Some of the history on that's a little bit shady. But we didn't get to like a 100-point scale and a letter grade system until the late 1800s. So when we talk about technology, we have a lot of people that are concerned and excited about AI, which essentially for us came out in 2022. But we're not considering that we have archaic technology in our letter grade system, that we're not thinking about how those are other forms of technology. We've just accepted that everybody kind of uses it now, and we're not doing that same critical thinking anymore because it's been so heavily adopted. Other things that affected teaching, use of films. I know I use films in some of my courses, but films have been around for over 100 years. And the rest of these are rough dates. I just want to be upfront. But universal design for learning from Rose and Meter was around 1984. We're seeing that have a resurgence right now of universal design in some of our teaching and learning spaces. The first LMS was introduced shortly after the internet came out. So learning management system like Moodle or Canvas or whatever, Blackboard. Flipped classrooms. There's some work that originated in the 80s, but it really didn't become popular until the early 2000s. MOOCs, these massive open online classrooms, became pretty popular in 2012, and then became really, really popular in 2020. I don't know why. We see consumer technology playing an influence with VR, AR, and XR. We see a lot of VR simulations in healthcare. We see extended reality simulations where you get to work manually with parts that are virtualized. The world goes remote in 2020. We learned a lot about our teaching strategies then. Almost all of us adopted Zoom or Teams or WebEx or some sort of online tool. Ungrading was published by Susan Bloom in 2020, and Public Gen I became available to us in 2022. And so as we think through this, I just want to acknowledge that every time one of these technologies comes through, we are all individually making decisions that decide if we adopt these technologies or not. And so starting with that background and keeping some of those innovations in teaching, what we have is sort of that pink axis or that pink plane of that Rubik's Cube, where it's the faculty development against the student development. And we see some things here. And so what we can imagine is that if student development is sort of earlier stages where they're developing competency, so everything on the left side here, versus advanced stages where they're developing purpose and identity. And I did borrow from Magolda for the first column, from Perry for the second column, and from Chickering for the third column, just to kind of blend those models. And if faculty development is awareness plays around or integrates with purpose, basically how skillful are you with that technology, that's going to dictate what you can or cannot do in the classroom. So for example, if you do not know anything about flipped classrooms and your students are in multiplicity and relativism where you want them to do a lot of reading on their own at home, well, you're not really going to be able to do a lot with flipped classrooms down in this space because you need more skill with it. Until you have some of the skill with it, you're not going to be able to use it. So you may default to other modes of teaching and learning where they watch videos in class and they don't come with questions, but they post them on discussion boards because those are the technologies, those are the things you're more familiar with. So the last theory I want to bring up is affect theory. And I see Dr. Hall is on the call. He's an expert about affect, especially related to health and exercise. And so as we dig deep, you'll notice that a lot of these studies are from the 60s, 70s. They're older studies, but some that are getting a little bit updated. And in short, affect is just how we feel about things. It's a really, Eric is going to be upset that I described it that way, but it's essentially how we feel about things. Does it make us feel good or does it make us feel bad? And that can be a physiological feeling, so literally a biological reaction to something, or it could be more of an emotional, psychological reaction, and there's different frames of thought there. And so a lot of this came from the 60s. Sylvan Tompkins, you see on the left, the affect is this pre-subjective, autonomic, like biological response to some sort of stimulus. And over the years, it's gotten updated to have some ideas that affect is sticky, that once you have sort of a feeling of what you feel about something, that you get a little bit stuck with that. But not only that, it's sticky in the sense of if I think something is really silly, I am going to tell Brandon Sheridan that I think this is really silly, and he is going to think that this might be really silly. And he'll consider that and weigh that if it aligns with his beliefs, right? And so that stickiness isn't just sticking to me, it can also stick and perpetuate across people. And that's Sarah Ahmed in the second picture there. And then Anderson, Cameron Anderson, I think it's Dak Keltner, and Oliver John are the next three. They sort of came out with some frameworks that affect is shared socially, that it fits within the social structures, that there are some aspects of things that just generally make people feel good and other things that generally make people feel bad. And so what I want you to think about real quick, this wheel comes from a paraphrasing of Tompkins' work, but this wheel is saying positive to negative affect, so positive on the right, negative on the left, and basically how intense, if you're deactivated, a low state of arousal versus activated, a high state of arousal, want to do something with that energy, what sort of emotions fit within there. And this is what we sort of think of as affect, okay? So I want you to just think real quick, if a technology makes you feel depressed, are you going to gravitate towards using that technology? Are you going to spend the time to develop the skills you need so you can use that technology effectively? Probably not. You might be motivated by some other outside forces that say, you know, I really need to learn this. And over time, maybe your relationship with that technology changes, but maybe not. Now, if you're very comfortable with something, so we see down here, it's a slight positive affect, but not a lot of energy associated with it. You probably aren't going to want to change that practice. You're comfortable with it. And we talk about our students trying to push them out of their zones of comfort into their zones of learning fairly often. But if you derive joy or enthusiasm or inspiration from a type of technology, and the example for me is probably alternate grading, that I just thought it was super cool. I was like, grading systems are broken. I'm going to explore this really deeply. I spent a lot of time, and I still spend time thinking about what are different grading systems that I can use because it gives me some joy, inspiration, or enthusiasm. Okay. And so what I want you to think about, and I hope you can see this wheel clearly enough, but where does your best teaching happen? Does it actually happen in that inspiration, joy, enthusiasm? Because that can be too high energy for some people, that it gets a little chaotic. Does it happen more in the tranquility, calmness range? Do you actually do the best when you're stressed out and worried? I mean, I know on some projects that is definitely me. I need a little stress to help motivate me. And I just want you to think about how your yeah, absolutely, Smaraki. It can change. It can change in different contexts. And I want you just to think about how feeling certain affects is going to dictate what pedagogical decisions you're going to make. And so one model for this, I love emojis, is that if you are scared about AI, if you're fearful, you are probably motivated not to let students use it. If you're fearful AI is going to come for your job, well, let's just not train students to use AI, and then they can't come for our jobs, right? Or something like that. So you're more likely to restrict or ban its use. If you are curious about AI use, I couldn't find this emoji on the on Canva. If you're uncertain, you might revert to older strategies, right? You might be sticking with the things that feel a little bit more comfortable, things like our blue books, things like having some oral exams that we know are really difficult to cheat, or rather difficult to use AI to cheat. If you are curious, you might be starting to try to put the pieces of a puzzle together. Now, what you'll notice is this is not a complete puzzle. There are not four corners. There's no way that this all goes together. But if you have some confidence, for example, you're probably really working hard to fit the puzzle together. And so these are just some affects and emotions that might align with the ideas of drowning, floating, or swimming. Okay. So this brings us to our sort of other plane or our other axes, which are faculty affect versus faculty development. I didn't think it was appropriate to say faculty affect versus student development because students don't get like a whole lot of control over faculty affect or faculty development, but these seem to be more related. And like I said, this is an idea I'm still working on formulating a little bit. But faculty affect, as we go from something like disgust to indifference to excitement, it is going to change what we actually do here. And I would contend that the top left, the middle left and middle, and the bottom row probably don't even exist. There probably aren't spaces that they are dictating that if you are excited, you are only going to be in one of these two spots. You're either going to play around with it or you are going to be trying to integrate it into your material. If you're indifferent, it probably opens up all three, I would guess. Right? You want to be aware. You might play around a little bit. You'll probably integrate some things with purpose, but maybe less so there. And if you're disgusted by it, you're probably only aware of it. Right? And so some of these blocks don't actually contain pedagogies. And as I said at the beginning, we're going to tend to use the pedagogies that gives us a positive affect and stunt our development with those that give us that negative affect, so that we're not going to expand our teaching ability if we feel crummy about it. And so at this point, there's no intervention. It's just be aware of it. Be aware of how the technology makes you feel, and decide if that's something, self-author, if that's something that you want to do about in your own faculty development. And so I also want to wrap up with just some reflection on different developmental stages that I've worked with this and some different strategies that have been beneficial for me. So fall 2024, I taught Core 1100, our first year seminar, the global experience. You'll notice in the top right, that is the first page of my syllabus. Yes, that is an entire page. AI Art made the whole thing. AI Art made a whole lot of the whole syllabus. I made this super groovy visual thing, a lot of little like small chunks of information. It was really fun to create, but honestly, it had no influence on the students. It's still just a syllabus, right? But it looks fun. I liked it. I was excited about it. I did get complimented on my follow-up to this, where I went back to a kind of a more traditional syllabus. But I taught it for the first time in the fall of 2024. At that time, most of the courses I had previously taught were slightly less susceptible to AI use at the time. At that point, AI wasn't really doing like full-blown math problems, biomechanics problems that I would assign there. They weren't good at reflecting the way that they are now. But AI use was rampant in the course. It was just obvious. And I was like, a deer in headlights. I didn't have a strong AI policy. And so when I shifted to teach it again in the spring, I said, hey, I got to make some changes. And so I didn't try to like fix everything, but I wanted to see just a couple things improve. So one was more engagement and discussion with others, and making sure my students are actually prepping for class. And so what did I do? One, I quizzed over reading before discussion. That got them to actually do some of the reading or try to use AI to do the reading for them, which was not effective because our reading was not like that. I circled up and tracked discussion, so I had them have more face-to-face time. And remember, these are all first-year students, so that intrapersonal pieces are important to their developmental stage. And I added an AI disclosure on every single assignment that contributed towards grades. So if it was an assignment that was just a check, no check type of thing, I didn't need the AI disclosure. But if points were assigned to it, I want the AI disclosure. And it was simply, did you use it? How did you use it? What did you do? The outcomes I saw from these pedagogical moves were that students clearly learned to read before class. Not everyone, but a lot more were actually ready to come discuss the material. And they still needed some work on sharing or challenging ideas, but that's okay because they're first year students. I shouldn't get them to perfection in our first year seminar during the second semester of their first year. I should just get them exposed to like, hey, you can actually use each other's names. You can talk to each other instead of just piggyback on what everybody else said. The second example I want to give is our integrative neuroscience, which I taught this past fall. For some context, it's a brand new major. I helped co-design the course with Linnea Witzak-Oldfather, Will Schreiber, and Aaron Piepmeyer. It was my first time teaching this course, and in my background, I've never actually taken an intro neuroscience course myself, so I have some gaps there. It leans towards biology, which I'll just say is not my lens of neuroscience. I certainly know it, but not to the extent that our biology faculty would. And I had first years through seniors. So developmentally, they are all over the place, a totally different context. And so the goal and challenge that I had is we got halfway through the semester and the material we created for journal clubs just wasn't hitting, and it wasn't hitting where we were in that moment. And so the move I took was to use some just-in-time teaching, which I basically said, oh, I'll just prep a whole new journal article. I'll make the video. I'll do all of the stuff that Will Schreiber did most of the journal club work, guided notes, all this stuff. And I felt incredible stress to turn that around so quickly. So I tried Notebook LM as I was prepping to get a sense of, one, how that technology worked a little bit. I'd heard a little bit about it, but I didn't know a lot about it yet. And I used it and I created an explainer slide deck for the article so I could give like a brief introduction to some of the pieces. And I discussed my lesson prep with my students. So I intentionally said, hey, here's the Notebook LM. It creates a podcast style video with some cool artwork. I did this because I was stressed, because I was like, I don't think I can do this fast enough, but I ended up doing all the work and then being able to share this with you anyway. And what I learned was that because I did all of that work first, I actually knew that the Notebook LM had a pretty decent product for this particular developmental stage, and it worked well. But if I had just done that without reading the article, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be sitting in this seat is honestly how I feel about it. And so some of the outcomes from those experiences is that we had an authentic discussion with my students about stress and shortcuts. I'd modeled my own AI use in what I think is an appropriate, ethical, and professional way. And students could actually, because they got that primer in very simple terms, students actually engaged in the conversation on a pretty complex paper a lot more effectively than had we not had that. And that's anecdotal in my opinion. So I have just a couple more slides. I know we want to save time for Q&A, but additional use cases. So stream of thought notes becoming a meeting agenda. I do that often. I'll draft things for neuroscience and then, hey, turn this into an agenda. Consolidating spreadsheets to assign conference reviewers. I do a lot of service work for International Dance Medicine and Science, Association of Dance Medicine and Science, and I actually assign all of the reviewers for all of the conference abstracts. And so I use AI to help me with doing first runs, but I have a team of 3 or 4 people that we double check and make sure we still have that human layer on it to ensure, but it probably saves us 2 weeks of getting that task done in a time-sensitive task. Making formatting consistent. I put this one in stars because it is only consistent. It is not good, but it is consistent, which sometimes is all that I'm looking for. One example of this is I've taken some assignments and reframed them using the TILT framework, the Transparency in Learning and Teaching framework. And so I can take an old assignment and say, hey, map it onto these TILT concepts, and it can start helping me build that before I put it all together. I've used it to expand question banks for quizzes, for online quizzes, so I have more possible questions, formatting those quiz questions for the learning management system, developing rubrics. I hate rubrics personally, but students absolutely love them. So having AI help create a rubric that is a heuristic of what I'll be looking for without assigning points has been a useful enhancement for their learning. And then turning an email, this is one of my favorite ones, turning an email that has 10 important dates into actual calendar invites really helps me stay organized. But what I have to say with all of these use cases is that I always review this pretty carefully. I'm not just AI and done. It is if it's something that is written, it is starting with my writing, it's getting modified, and it is ending with my writing. And I believe it is still me when I submit it, whatever it might be. And it doesn't save any time. I might be doing a little bit better with stuff, but I'm not saving any time. And so I just want to be upfront and honest about that. And so this brings us back to our model, really just a closing slide to say, think about your emotions and how that might be influencing your pedagogical decisions. We know that we have a lot of support and ideas around how we can support student development, how we can get more skill ourselves in our faculty development, but sometimes we ignore that, like, hey, you know, teaching outside is just really fun for me and I love it. Okay, go teach outside more. Like, that's a simple thing to enhance your classroom. And so I'm going to wrap with this before questions. I just really love this quote as I was preparing for this. Daniel Herman is a high school teacher, a writing instructor, and he writes for The Atlantic. Everything is made up. It's true. Absolutely everything's made up. I love this. The essay as a literary form, we made that up. Grammatical rules as markers of intelligence, we made that up. Writing itself as a technology, we made that up. It is all made up by human minds. And so what he contends is that what OpenAI, what ChatGPT is having us question is, are some of these things worth keeping around? Or are they archaic technologies like grades? And so thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry I cut some of our question time short, but I would love to take questions and invite conversation with the whole group.
Thank you, Matt, for your presentation and for sharing the continuum-based approach to using AI across courses from introductory neuroscience to senior seminars. If you have any questions, please unmute yourself to ask it, or you can use the Q&A feature or put it in chat. Thank you. Any questions for Matt?
Sparky, I'd be happy to share the slide deck. And this will be recorded as well, so you can watch and listen that way. But yeah, I'm happy to share the slide deck. I will share, I do have a reference slide. I will share ChatGPT aided me in this, and I would be happy to even give you the transcript of absolutely everything, so you can see how far I diverged and converged through that process of creating this actual presentation. So I did also want to acknowledge that if anyone wants that transcript, I'd be happy to share it.
I think Moose has a question.
What is it? What is it?
I don't have an question. I'm trying to turn this raise hand down. I'm sorry. I accidentally clicked the raise hand.
Moose.
Yeah, Hilton has a question. What are the implications? How would a dean move the needle on faculty emotion or motivation? Great question.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I guess you are my favorite dean, according to your previous comment. Absolutely. That is a really good question. And so affect is incredibly hard to innately change. That there aren't really strong interventions to change people's affects around a particular experience or type of experience. We know that really well with exercise, that generally people either like exercise or don't like exercise, really hard to change. However, I think what folks in leadership can do is having availability of multiple pedagogies and pedagogical tools, and encourage faculty explore different pedagogies, especially those that they realize give them joy, and support those types of pedagogies, as opposed to like a blanket, everyone has to do AI or everyone has to do asynchronous remote learning when COVID happens. And so I think supporting faculty in ways that they are able to choose pedagogies that give them joy, that give them positive affects, is probably what I would want from my favorite dean.
Another question from Brandon. So where do we go? Toss out life preservers, let people drown. How do we operationalize a lifeline?
That's also a good question. And I think so. One of the things I've been thinking about with this analogy is that not everyone has to learn to swim. You don't have to get in the water. You simply don't. I think to an extent, um, I think we need to offer swimming lessons. I think we need to give space, give opportunity for people to explore, again, the technologies broadly. But specifically with AI, I think we need to give the support to explore how to use it, how not to use it, when not to use it, both sides of that coin so that they can make the best decisions for them. But as long as we have really valuable, strong structures like faculty autonomy, we can't require those types of things. And so we also have to be somewhat accepting that, it's okay if somebody gets on a boat and goes to the next destination without getting in the water and never playing an AI. I think, and I think about this a lot. Some of my dissertation work was in variability of human movement. So I think about the concept of variability a lot. And I actually think it's really important that our students have wide, varied experiences because, when they're interacting with their grandparents or with a potential romantic partner or on a job interview, there's not going to be AI there to help them navigate those intrapersonal aspects. And so we still need those spaces that are devoid of technology, that are really focusing on the human connection piece. So I think, to answer your question, I think the lifeline that we need is probably learning opportunities that are exciting and engaging, that give positive affect, but also some acceptance that not everyone has to engage in it. I see Smaraki has a question.
Okay.
Since it's moving so fast, how can we be early adopters without getting too overwhelmed or forgetting our pedagogical values and style? I think that is a fantastic question. And I would go back to some of those student development theories that I presented and say, until you really have a strong sense of your identity, you should be pretty cautious in trying too many things. It's a tricky question. I think what I get worried about with early adoption is that I'm just wasting time, that it's not going to be useful time trying out new technologies, more so than I'm going to lose sight of what my values are. I think one thing that every educator should be doing is thinking about what their actual goals are for their course and their assignments and work backwards from there. I think a lot of us are stuck in our traditions, whether they're disciplinary traditions, whether they're personal, the way my professor taught me type of traditions. I think a lot of us are a little bit stuck in some of those traditions. And I think if we actually say, this is the goal, this is what I want them to be able to know, to be able to do, or to be able to feel, how do I create that? I think that's a different approach to thinking about your teaching.
Thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you in the next one. The next presentation is Dr. Shanetta Pendleton on April 9th. And as always, Elon AI Hub will share the details along with announcements and any logistical details that you guys need to know. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your participation.